Kansans are still trying to figure out how to pay for last winter's natural gas bills. Now, prices are headed up again. How high will they go? Plus, could a new city street racing ordinance make it illegal to watch from the sidewalk? But first, Kansas's first child death from COVID reignites the debate over how to handle the pandemic in schools. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week. I'm Dion Leffler, in for Pilar Pedraza, who's home on quarantine, while her son, who also works on this show, battles a potentially serious case of COVID. This comes as the state announced the first death of a minor in Kansas from the coronavirus, and the number of schools dealing with outbreaks continues to grow. Cake's Hannah Baker takes a look at what parents think about all this.
Take precautions, take this for real, take it serious.
I really hope people will take this serious, because at first I didn't, and now I see what it can really do.
That's the reaction parents picking up their kids at Hadley Middle School had after hearing about the first reported middle school student death in Kansas due to COVID-19. Justina Fleming says at first she questioned the masks and vaccines for younger kids until her whole family got the virus.
My girls, they got their first shot, and then a week later they got COVID from the school. So now they can't even get their second shot for 90 days. So I'm scared.
Scarlett Marks said she also had her doubts about COVID precautions helping, but when her kids were exposed, it changed her mind.
So now those that are old enough, that's over the age of 12, we got them vaccinated, and the ones that are under 12, we just push the masks a lot.
State Education Commissioner Randy Watson released the news of the death Wednesday.
We did have a student, a middle school student, pass away of COVID.
During Thursday's KU Health System update, doctors say masking in schools is vital to keeping students safe, and a vaccine for ages 5 to 12 may be approved as early as next month.
And the reality of the situation is that these vaccines are extremely efficacious. They prevent significant illness. And if you are eligible, if you are 12 and above, you really should be getting this vaccine so this tragedy doesn't happen.
Today we return to having lawmakers join us to discuss the issues of the day. And this week we have the Kansas House Majority Leader, Republican Dan Hawkins from Wichita, and his Democratic counterpart, the House Minority Leader, Tom Sawyer, also from Wichita. Welcome, gentlemen. Tom, I'm going to start with you. During the legislative session, it was they were pretty adamant about taking over running the response to COVID, and it seemed like there was a lot of credence given to people who were anti-mask, who were against any restrictions or anything going on. Is this a predictable result?
Well, I think the most important thing anyone can do is get vaccinated, and I think it's important that the teachers, all the staff members in schools get vaccinated. I think it's important kids that are 12 to 17 get vaccinated. I think that's the single best thing we can do to help stop the spread of this disease. But I also think it's important to follow CDC guidelines. It's hard in schools, but as much as possible, stay 6 feet apart. Wear a mask, sanitize often, be careful. We did that stuff during the session. I mean, we really were pretty, in terms of the legislature, we had a lot of our committee meetings via Zoom or via the internet. We sat people 6 feet apart, did it on the House floor. We wore masks. I mean, on the House side, we pretty much did and stuff. So, I mean, we took those precautions, and I think we should encourage everybody to do that. I think it's really important that people do that. Now, in terms of legislation, we have a number of conservative legislators that don't like the idea of pushing some of that stuff in terms of state law or mandating, but we still need to encourage people to do it. I think it's very important, particularly the vaccinations, because I think to me that's the single most important thing you can do. The other thing is too, I think testing is also important, which is something that isn't talked about as much, but those are all key things that people need to do to take precautions. And if we want to keep our schools open, I think it's really important to try to get your kids vaccinated as soon as they're eligible to be vaccinated, and take all those precautions. Because if there are more outbreaks, more kids die. I mean, this is the third person under 18 now that's died in Kansas from COVID. If more people die, you're going to see schools shutting down again. I don't think any of us really want that.
And Dan, let me ask you about school shutdowns. One of the things that the legislature did was basically prohibit at-home learning, remote learning. With that being off the table, what should schools be thinking about? What's the next step here?
Well, I think as Tom just said, we went through a pretty serious discussion about how we were going to operate last year, and we operated in a different way, and actually than what a lot of states did. And we literally got through the session without anybody getting sick in the House side. I believe also on the Senate side, I think. So that does work if you take those measures. I think the biggest thing is we don't want to mandate. We don't like mandates. I think when you start mandating, it makes people mad. And I'm sure Tom's getting probably just as many emails as I'm getting. We're getting a lot, believe me. We're getting a lot of emails about the school situation. And some schools are taking some pretty drastic steps. Some schools are not. Anytime there's a loss of life, you feel for those families who have lost a loved one during this pandemic. It has happened, and it's probably going to continue to happen somewhat. It has slowed down, and we really actually think that we may have hit the peak of this Delta variant now. So things are starting to kind of slow down a little bit, and we hope that continues. But people are just tired. People are really just tired of the constant talk of whether it's a vaccine mandate, a mask mandate, whatever it is. And it seems like the more that goes on, the tougher it gets out there. And some of our emails get very difficult to read.
Okay. Well, moving on, from COVID to street racing. The Wichita City Council this week putting harsher penalties in place for illegal street racing, new rules that apply even to those watching the races.
Noise, property damage, litter, complaints about street racing in Wichita are on the rise, according to Wichita Police. That's on top of 5 deaths from street racing in Wichita since August of 2019. The Wichita Police say current state laws do not have specifics like definitions of what illegal street racing is, and they don't have penalties to act as a deterrent, which is why the department asked the city to put its own ordinance in place. The council agreed, giving new regulations first-round approval this week. The new regulations make any unauthorized street race a public nuisance and require officers to impound the vehicles. The new ordinance also includes mandatory fines starting at $250 for first offense, and even house arrest as penalties for illegal racing. That includes making it an infraction to watch a street race or a sideshow event, and that's also a $250 mandatory fine for first offense. And it bans motorcycle stunts such as standing on the seat or popping wheelies.
So Dan, when's the last time you stood on the seat of a motorcycle and or in a street race?
Well, Diane, I've never been in a street race. I don't think I ever stood on the seat of a motorcycle and popped a wheelie, but I sure have popped a few wheelies in my younger years. But today, if you fall, it hurts too bad, so I just can't do that. This is an interesting situation we have here. We were talking before we started filming. I go to bed pretty early every night, so I don't see these things. So when I read that first story, I immediately called my county commissioner, because I really thought, wow, if somebody is watching, somebody just walks up and happens to see it, you're going to fine them $250? And my council members, Brian Fry, and he said, Dan, that was the first reading. The second reading coming up next week will probably change that. He said we've had a lot of feedback since that story come out, and he said we're probably going to make a few changes, which I think they need to, because I think you just happen to buy it and you see it and you get a ticket, or you walk up on it and you get a ticket. That's pretty tough.
Well, yeah, and I think there's maybe some constitutional issues there as well.
Yeah.
Freedom of association and you know, just being where you want to be. Yeah. And Tom, what do you think?
Well, I agree with I was pretty stunned at the $250 fine for watching. I don't know how you can. I agree. I don't think it's unconstitutional. You can fine somebody for just watching something. You know, so I think that's going too far. I occasionally do hear from constituents that complain about the street racing, and it is very dangerous to street race on a public street. But so I understand the city trying to crack down on that, but it doesn't make any sense to. I don't think you should have a ticket at all for people watching. That's going too far.
Well, yeah, and all the council members were saying that, you know, this is one of the things they hear the most about, that they that people are upset about it. So, is there anything at the state level, either one of you, that?
You know, to me, this seems more of a local kind of issue. You know, I think, you know, it does seem to be a problem in Wichita. I don't know that it is out in rural Kansas, and we do have some state laws. I know there's a state law. You can't accelerate. You can give somebody a ticket for just accelerating too fast, which I would think fit in these cases. But I'm not sure there's too much we have to do at the state level. I think we've got, I think this is kind of a local thing, and we let local communities deal with it however they need to.
All right. Well, good update, Dan, on that they're maybe going to change this before they do the final passage.
Yeah.
And we'll see what they come up with this time. And at the same council meeting, the City Council gave first approval to privatizing the management of Century 2. It was a decision that made lovers of the venue very unhappy, as Kate Overstreet tells us. Kate.
After 3 hours of presentations, council discussions, and some fierce public input.
My children have never been to Entrust Bank Arena. All of my children have been to Century 2.
The Wichita City Council voted 5-2 to approve a new operating agreement for Century 2. The building's day-to-day operations and upkeep will now be run by ASM Global, the same company that runs Entrust Bank Arena and the Orpheum.
We will work very hard to reinforce the Century 2 brand to our partners in the industry.
Those in favor of the deal say ASM will be able to operate Century 2 more efficiently and bring in more shows.
All wanted to see activation out of that space, and this contract is going to make that happen.
Mayor Brandon Whipple, who voted against it, says there was not enough time to answer people's questions about the contract.
I felt that we needed to take a little more time, talk with our stakeholders, with the people who utilize Century 2, and get down to the details and get that information out before we made a decision.
That was also one of the main concerns of Save Century 2. Another one is upkeep of the building. Under the contract, ASM is not responsible for repairing existing problems, leading those at Save Century 2 to think this is the beginning of the end if ASM does not decide to invest in repairs.
And that will just further the argument of, look, it's outdated, we don't want it anymore, tear it down.
But the group will not go down without a fight.
So we're going to get the candidate forum going, and we're going to try to elect new city council members.
Well, when you look at this, I mean, Century 2 has always been operated as a municipal auditorium to provide relatively low-cost entertainment to the masses, and this is going to be a whole new thing for Wichita. I mean, we have the Entrust Bank Arena that's run basically for the profit of a private company, and it seems like this is kind of the trend toward getting rid of services that the government used to provide and having those provided by private enterprise. Is that a good trend, Tom?
Well, I do have concern. You know, I've heard from a few constituents on this too, that are very concerned, particularly about the fact that they didn't take public input on this. They expressed concerns about the fact they think this is the city council's first way of trying to get rid of Century 2. That by, again, not including a clause in there requiring maintenance upkeep, that this is just the first step of doing away with it. So there's a lot of concerns about that. So I think if I was on the council, I think I would have wanted to take a little more time on this, got more public input, and proceed a little more slowly, because it does give at least the appearance to a lot of the people that are concerned about saving Century 2 that this is like the first step to just getting rid of it.
Yeah. Dan?
You know, I think one thing we need to do when we look at this, and of course the Save the Century 2 has been a very contentious issue for over a year now. A lot of work has went into developing petition drives and stuff, trying to stop it from being torn down. And so far, that's happened. They haven't done that. But I do think that when you look at this effort to bring in a group to actually run it, I actually am probably in support of that. And I think that we should separate the two, because I'm not really in favor at all of tearing Century 2 down. I think a lot of us want Century 2 to remain. But the city's putting $1.5 million, $2 million a year into Century 2. They're in the red. That's what I've been told. The figures is anywhere from $1.5 million to $2 million, depending on the year. I don't have that verified, but a city councilman told me that, so I assume that they know what they're talking about.
Okay.
You know, when government doesn't always do everything right. You know, government was meant to do things that people or industry or private enterprise can't do. Roads, police, fire, public health, the list goes on and on, libraries. But this venue may not be something that really needs to be under the public venue. Maybe we do need to have a private enterprise working on it. At the state level, and Tom has been at the state level a lot longer than I have, but we don't take care of our buildings. Buildings, you know, the state owns these assets, these buildings, and they don't take care of them. And so what have we done over the last few years is we've started privatizing that. We lease more buildings than we own, or we're starting to lease more. We still may own more than we lease, but we're starting to lease more than what we certainly build now, simply because those landlords, those building owners, will take care of those buildings where the state won't. And why won't we? Well, it's not that we don't want to. It's that budgets get in the way.
Right.
You know, all of a sudden you have to spend money here or there, and you prioritize, and all of a sudden our biggest asset, these buildings, are being left to go downhill. So I think this is actually maybe a good idea. I hope it's not the first step, though, like Tom thinks it might be.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem with the way this was handled by the city council, is that they rushed this through pretty quick. People didn't really get a chance to see the contract and learn more about it and give public input. So I think, considering all the concerns about Century 2, I think it would behoove the city to be a little more transparent in this process. I mean, in the end, it could be good, but it's not a good start.
Okay. Well, speaking of money, we're all wondering how long it will take to pay off natural gas bills more than 200 times their normal size, all from last February's polar cold snap.
Kansas's largest natural gas utility, Kansas Gas Service, continues to resist releasing records of how much suppliers charged it as part of an ongoing price gouging investigation. But the Kansas Reflector points out some of that information has come to light in other filings. That's why we know that for 10 days in February, natural gas prices jumped from under $3 per unit to as much as $300 to $600 on some days. As regulators look at passing that $1 billion in extra costs on to Kansans, prices for this year are back on the rise. The U.S. Energy Administration reports natural gas storage supplies are nearly 17% lower than last year. The reason behind it? Hurricanes in the Gulf slow down production. Because of this, they can impact the prices we see here in Kansas. The Kansas Gas Service Public Relations Manager says production demand, storage volumes, and weather are what impacts the cost of gas. While she says the group tries to secure the lowest price, it can be difficult to predict. But she says she's seen an increase.
That we have seen increases in the price of natural gas. And according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they are citing lower than normal national storage levels as well as lower production levels.
Well, one of the questions that I have here is, what are we going to do about the winter storm? We have people who are investigating that. The Kansas Corporation Commission recently dropped their investigation into whether we were actually being gouged on these gas prices. And the problem there is that we don't have any access to information. We can't tell whether we're gouged or not. And I mean, what can the legislature do for this? I mean, there's a lot of money on the table. We're talking about $600-700 per customer that's going to be spread over 10 years, and a lot of people I've talked to really don't want to do that. So
we had a situation this year where I would say Tom would agree with me. We were all very proud of what the legislature did. Immediately when that happened, the bill started coming in. The state has idle funds. They have a lot of idle funds, and I can't tell you how many. It's billions, isn't it, Tom? Mm-hmm. Many billions, and we took some of the idle funds and put it towards. Actually, we made it available to banks to loan at a very low interest rate to businesses that are extremely hard hit. And businesses are the ones that really are hit. Now we're being hit now, and we're going to be. Our home bills are probably going to go up $4 or $5 a month over the next several years to pay back that. But for businesses, it was $100,000, $300,000, $500,000 bill just for that few days. I was actually at a client of mine this week, and he asked me about that. He said, "What are you guys? Can you guys do any more?" And I said, "Well, I think it was probably back in the 70s when natural gas was deregulated. We do like what happened from that because gas has remained cheap over the years. Natural gas is probably one of the most inexpensive forms of heating that you can get. So it's done a good job. But when we have an Arctic freeze like we had, and then you have the perfect storm hit down in Texas to where it freezes off all the wells to where they can't get gas, then as demand and supply get out of whack, prices go up, and that's what's happened. Now, should they have went up that much? I'm not sure they should have. I think that was excessive, going from $3 or $4 a unit, and that's a MMBTU is a unit, up to $600 for the same unit inside of a day or two. That's crazy. So the AG is investigating it. Our Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, is investigating that, along with probably most of the Attorney Generals throughout our region, the central part of the United States. They're all looking at it. They're going to determine whether there's actual price gouging, and if there is, I think they'll take action. I think we did what we were supposed to do as a legislature. Now it's really, there's a lot of things that we can't do. There's some things we just can't do when it comes to this.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to move on to to our next topic here. Changing directions, there's a new contender to replace Derek Schmidt as Kansas Attorney General, the first Democrat to enter the race.
Lawrence attorney and former police officer Chris Mann announced his campaign for Kansas Attorney General this week. The Kansas Reflector reports Mann currently operates a private practice, but worked as a police officer until a drunk driver hit him in 2002. Mann got his law degree from Washburn University and served as a prosecutor in the Wyandotte County District Attorney's Office. He's also served as National Board Chairman of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and was part of passing a Kansas law that required DUI offenders to have ignition locks installed in their vehicles. Mann says, "I've been a police officer, the victim and survivor of crime, a prosecutor, and a private attorney. I will bring a different set of experiences to this office at a pivotal time," end quote. At this point, he's the only Democrat who's announced in the race. He joins Republicans Chris Kobach, Kelly Warren, and Tony Mattivi in seeking to replace Derek Schmidt, who's vacating the seat to run for Kansas governor.
Well, Tom, you're the Democrat on the panel today. What do you think this is going to mean to that race?
Well, well, first of all, it's exciting. We have a candidate. I think it's important that Democrats field strong candidates, even though it's a very Republican state. And I actually think he's a very strong candidate. I don't know him very well. He did call me last week, but his background is great. I mean, a former police officer, a national head of the board of MAD, former county prosecutor. Currently, he practices law in Lawrence and specializes in helping poor people that can't afford attorneys. And so, I mean, I think he's a great candidate, and I think it's good that Democrats have a strong candidate. And I'm excited about his candidacy. And again, I don't know a lot about him, but just a little bit, a chance to find out about him and stuff. I think we're fielding a very good, strong candidate, and it'll be a good contrast to the Republicans so far.
Yes. Well, tell us about the Republicans, Dan.
Yeah. You know, I've worked really hard at trying to stay out of that race and not get too deep into it.
Can't hardly blame you.
Yeah, that one's a tough one. You know, you've got Chris Kobach, who is well known as anybody out there in the political sphere. I mean, that's the one thing he has on his side is he's well known. You have Kelly Warren, Senator Kelly Warren, who's kind of a newcomer to politics. She's really only been around 3 years. I believe that's right. And yet she's gotten some notoriety, and she's starting to get some traction. You have Tony Mattivi, who's a career prosecutor on the federal level. He's Kansas's U.S. assistant U.S. attorney. Has been for quite a while. So has prosecuted some really high-profile cases, and so it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be a primary that probably we would just as soon not see, but it's going to be a primary nonetheless. And we'll see who comes out on the winning side of that one.
Well, and I mean, I'm starting to get excited about this race, actually. I mean, you have some really diverse people with diverse backgrounds. You have a lot of qualifications there. I guess I just have to ask you, Tom, does Democrat have a chance in this race?
Oh, they do. I mean, we've elected Democratic Attorney Generals. Back to Vern Miller, Kurt Schneider, in more recent years, Morrison. I mean, so we've had Democratic Attorney Generals win. So I think it's possible, and particularly with a good candidate. And I think Chris Mann's a really good candidate, and he'll be a good contrast against the Republican nominee.
And who do you think the Republican nominee is going to be?
Oh man, that's hard to say. That's hard to get.
I know that wasn't a fair question, but I had to ask. Well, thanks again, Tom, Dan, for joining us this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to hear what you think about these topics or ideas for future shows. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.